In the quiet, unassuming town of Millfield, life often flowed like the gentle summer breeze. But tranquility shattered the day 21-year-old Emma Thompson vanished without a trace. It had begun as a normal day. Emma had headed out to the nearby university, leaving her close friends, Lucy and Jake, unaware of the dark fate awaiting her. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, panic gripped the town when Emma didn't return. Determined to solve the mystery of her disappearance, Lucy and Jake set out on a chilling adventure into the heart of the cornfields that bordered Millfield, where rumors whispered of strange happenings and unsettling shadows lurking among the towering cornstalks. Their uneasy investigation began in the late afternoon. Armed with flashlights and a desperate need for answers, the duo followed a narrow path that wove through the dense rows of corn. The air was heavy with an unsettling silence, broken only by whispers of the wind rustling the leaves and the ominous creaking of dry stalks. As they ventured deeper, Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. A prickling sensation crept over her skin, amplifying the tension in her chest. They stopped to examine odd markings on the ground, footprints that seemed out of place, leading deeper into the field. Just as dusk began to envelop the landscape, darkness swept across the cornfield, casting haunting shadows that danced eerily in the fading light. Lucy squinted, catching sight of a fleeting figure clad in dark clothing lurking among the cornstalks. Her heart raced as she pointed toward the apparition, but before Jake could see it, the figure vanished, swallowed by the twilight. Fear surged through Lucy, and she let out a piercing scream that echoed through the stillness. A cry of pure terror that sent a chill racing down Jake's spine. Grabbing her hand, they sprinted back toward the car, the crunching of corn beneath their hurried footsteps melding with their frantic breaths. In the safety of the car, they locked the doors, but dread lingered in the air, wrapping around them like a frost-bitten blanket. Jake's voice trembled as he whispered, "What was that? Did you see it?" Disbelief morphed into fear, and as they exchanged apprehensive glances, they realized something sinister was at play in the cornfield. While the town outside remained oblivious to the shadows watching from the dark, Lucy and Jake could feel it, an unseen presence, lurking and waiting. They would have to return, for Emma was still missing, and in the menacing shadows of the cornfield, answers awaited. Little did they know, those answers would come at a far greater price than they ever imagined. Lucy and Jake sat in the dim light of Lucy's bedroom, the faint hum of the ceiling fan cutting through the heavy atmosphere as they examined Emma's journal. The worn leather cover was almost as familiar as their own faces, containing the secrets of their friend who had vanished without a trace. As they flipped through the pages, they were met with familiar scrawls that told of late-night study sessions and plans for the future. But then, the tone of Emma's words began to shift. Cryptic entries spoke of a mysterious figure that she felt was always watching her, a dark presence that followed her everywhere. With each word Lucy read aloud, an uncomfortable chill weaved its way through the room, tightening around them like invisible hands. "Look at this," Jake said, his finger tracing the line dense with anxiety. She wrote about feeling unsafe, like someone was stalking her. A creeping sense of dread began to settle in, thickening the air and making the small room feel constrictive. They were only trying to remember Emma, to gather the pieces of her life, but with each word, the whispers began, quiet at first, almost imperceptible, but growing louder like a chorus of lost souls pleading for attention. The journal seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and both friends shared a glance filled with fear and determination. Suddenly, the pages began to flutter violently as if caught in an unseen wind. Jake's heart raced. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The journal landed open in front of them, eerily settling on a specific page. It detailed a dark presence that had been with Emma, growing more threatening as the days progressed. The final line was a chilling proclamation that sent shivers down their spines. "It's too late for me." There was no further explanation, just an abrupt end, leaving an ominous tone behind that felt almost like a death knell. Lucy felt tears prick her eyes as she realized how deeply Emma had struggled with her fears. This wasn't just paranoia. She knew something was wrong. Each sentence felt like an unraveling thread of finality that drew them deeper into a mystery they hadn't anticipated. Just then, a faint crack echoed from somewhere outside, breaking the heavy silence, and they both jumped in unison, the feeling of being watched dawning more intensely upon them. Shadows danced mockingly across the walls, and as they turned back to confront the journal, it felt as though Emma's spirit lingered still, beckoning them to listen and, perhaps, to help. Under the cloak of night, Jake and Lucy stood hesitantly at the edge of the eerie cornfield where Emma had last been seen. Armed with only their flashlights and the remnants of courage, they took a collective breath and stepped into the looming rows of towering cornstalks. The moon cast an ethereal glow over the field, illuminating the way while thick shadows danced mockingly around them. Each rustle of leaves felt like a whisper, urging them to turn back, but they pressed on, driven by a desperate need for answers. "We need to do this, for Emma," Jake said, his voice wavering slightly, but resolve burned in his eyes. Lucy nodded in agreement, though anxiety gnawed at her insides. As they ventured deeper into the cornfield, the world outside faded away, leaving only the unsettling sounds of the night. Each creak of the cornstalks felt like the field itself was alive, watching their every move. Suddenly, a series of odd movements caught their attention, shadows flitting at the edges of their vision. The air thickened with an oppressive weight, and Lucy shivered, her instincts screaming that they were not alone. Then, without warning, a bone-chilling silence wrapped around them, as though the very night had drawn a deep breath, holding it in anticipation. Jake's flashlight flickered ominously, casting erratic beams across the field. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his heartbeat thunderous in his ears. Lucy squinted into the darkness, frustration mounting as she tried to focus on the shapes shifting in the corners of her vision. Just then, an intense feeling washed over her. Something cold and malevolent lingered among the rows. Panic set in as a shadow detached itself from the stalks, a figure cloaked in darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it. Lucy's scream pierced the night, echoing like a warning shot, a desperate cry for escape. "Run!" Jake shouted, already sprinting back towards the edge of the field, and without hesitation, Lucy followed. The figure lingered in the periphery, moving closer as they raced for the safety of the car. In a frantic sprint, their minds were a whirlwind of fear and disbelief, the shadows racing in tandem with them. They could feel the oppressive energy chasing them, thickening the air like a suffocating blanket. Just as they reached the clearing, Jake turned back for one fleeting moment. The figure stood just beyond the cornstalks, a twisted silhouette against the starlit sky, its presence evoking a deep-seated terror they had never known. With hearts pounding, they clambered into the car, locking the doors as if it would shield them from the darkness that followed. As Jake fumbled for the ignition, Lucy glanced back at the field one last time, her breath hitching in her throat. The figure was no longer visible, but the palpable dread lingered in the air. The night felt alive, carrying a sinister promise that the stalker was far from finished. Lucy had returned from the darkness, but something was irrevocably altered within her. It was evident in the vacant look that sometimes clouded her eyes, as if they were windows to another world. The nights grew longer as strange occurrences began to manifest in their small town. Lucy, once vibrant and full of life, now found herself ensnared in eerie phenomena that unfurled in the mundane corners of her room. Mirrors, which had always been simple reflections of reality, now appeared to hold secrets, a darkness that thrummed just beneath the surface. One particularly dreary evening, Jake sensed the apprehension coiled around them like shadows in the dim light. They sat together in Lucy's bedroom after yet another day of attempting to piece together Emma's fate. As the rain pounded rhythmically against the window, the atmosphere thrummed with tension. Jake caught Lucy staring into her makeup mirror, transfixed by her reflection, which mirrored her distress, yet seemed to twist it into something sinister. He watched as she ran her fingers along the edges of the glass, an action that bubbled with a strange energy. "Lucy?" Jake asked hesitantly, concerned by the way she continued to gaze with rapt attention. Her expression shifted, an uneasy amalgamation of confusion and dread, as her reflection flickered just a beat too late. Suddenly, her reflection grinned, wide and unsettling, while Lucy herself wore a mask of sorrow, tears clinging to her eyelashes. The sight tore through the silence, leaving Jake's heart racing. "Lucy, are you okay?" he urged, his voice barely breaking through the thick air around them. But she couldn't respond. She was too buried in disbelief and terror as she scratched at the mirror's surface, desperate for the truth. "What is happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The reflection, now animated with malice, mouthed words Lucy couldn't hear, but understood nonetheless. It was a twisted parody of her own self, teasing the cracks in her sanity, mocking her with what could only be described as pure malevolence. Just when her mind threatened to fracture completely, the moment shattered as Jake moved closer, resting his hand on her shoulder, grounding her in the moment. "Look away, don't let it get to you," he urged, his heart racing as he pondered whether they were dealing with something that defied logic. As her eyes shifted back to reality, the reflection slipped back to normalcy. Lucy was again just a girl staring at her own sorrowful face in the mirror. "Did you see that?" Lucy exclaimed, stepping back, her voice a wavering whisper, disbelief painting her features. It was smiling at me." The dread in the room intensified, like a dark fog creeping closer. Jake exchanged a nervous glance with Lucy. He knew they were involved in something far more sinister than they had anticipated. As he wrapped her in a supportive embrace, he recalled Emma's chilling journal entries about a dark presence, including writings about reflections and shadows coming to life. The revelation seeped into his bones, igniting an urgent need to uncover their next step. They had to confront whatever evil was lurking in the darkness, especially now that it had started to breach into the light. Little did they know, the shadows that now danced in their midst were only just beginning to awaken, and Lucy's struggle was merely the beginning of a darker reality they were yet to fully understand. As dusk settled over the small town, casting elongated shadows across the fields, Lucy and Jake approached the old barn that had become a relic of local lore, whispered about among townsfolk, and avoided by those who believed in its dark history. The structure loomed ahead, decrepit and shrouded in an eerie silence, as if the land itself held its breath, anticipating their arrival. The air felt thick with tension, a palpable energy that seemed to buzz against their skin, warning them of the horrors that lurked within. Armed with nothing but flashlights and their resolve, they pushed open the creaky barn door, the sound echoing ominously into the gloom. Inside, dust motes danced in the beams of their flashlights, revealing remnants of a forgotten time. A long-abandoned tractor, broken farming tools, and hay scattered about like a testament to years of neglect. As they stepped deeper into the barn, the chill in the air intensified, a stark contrast to the warmth of the fading day. Jake led the way, his heart pounding, as he rummaged through old boxes in search of clues about Emma's fate. What they found was far more horrifying than they had imagined. Photographs of missing townsfolk pinned haphazardly to the barn walls. Faces they recognized, twisted and frozen in a moment of fear, stared back at them, each one a reminder of lives lost to the lurking darkness that now consumed their minds. A sense of dread swept over Lucy as the realization set in. This place was a shrine to agony, a monument to the darkness that had claimed so many. Among the photos, they stumbled upon remnants of a ritual, a faded parchment with symbols scrawled in a hand that trembled with desperation. The words hinted at a malevolent force that thrived on fear and shadows, feeding on the souls of those who dared to venture too close. Unable to shake the encroaching feeling of being watched, Lucy and Jake exchanged wary glances, sensing that they were not alone. Suddenly, the barn door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them inside and sending a jolt of fear coursing through their veins. A cacophony of whispers erupted around them, echoing from the shadows that danced along the barn walls, each voice weaving a tale of sorrow and despair. As panic surged, Jake grabbed Lucy's hand, trying to keep her grounded, but shadows seemed to thicken, taking on twisted shapes that lunged toward them like phantoms from their worst nightmares. Faces twisted in agony emerged from the dark corners, unveiling the tortured souls that had been consumed by the very darkness they sought to confront. "Stay close," Jake shouted, his voice barely breaking the overwhelming sounds of despair that echoed off the barn's walls. With every frantic breath, Lucy felt the air grow heavier, an oppressive weight pressing down upon her chest. She could feel a force pulling at her, a dark tendril reaching out, and she realized with stark horror that they had awakened something not meant to be disturbed. As the shadows continued their relentless approach, Jake's flashlight flickered ominously, the beam illuminating ghostly figures that danced in a frenzy, their mouths moving silently, as if trapped in a plea for help. The barn became a realm of chaos, and every instinct screamed at them to flee. But with the door locked tight and the shadows closing in, Lucy and Jake stood at the precipice of their darkest fears, forced to confront the legacies of those who had come before them, now haunting the very place they sought answers. In that moment of desperation, they realized that the truth about Emma's disappearance and the sinister force stalking the town was lurking just beyond their grasp, a secret buried within the haunted walls of the barn, waiting to be unearthed, even if it meant sacrificing their own sanity. The chilling winds swept through the small town, stirring a sense of dread as Lucy and Jake tried to regain their composure after the harrowing events at the barn. They returned to their homes, hearts heavy with fear, but little did they know that the shadows had followed them. Later that evening, as Lucy scrolled through her phone in her dimly lit room, she noticed something unusual, a series of notifications from social media. To her shock, the messages came from accounts that appeared to belong to Emma, the missing girl they had been searching for. Each message bore a chilling warning: "Leave while you still can." Her heart raced as she shared the news with Jake over the phone, their voices trembling with uncertainty. Meanwhile, Jake, who was pacing in his living room, felt a chill run down his spine. As he looked at the notifications on his own phone, the unease turned to horror when he, too, received a message from Emma. It was the same warning, laced with desperation. Whispers filled the silence of his room, echoing the lingering suggestion that they were not safe, that their investigation had awakened something sinister. In an instant, the screen began to glitch and flicker, and suddenly an apparition, eerily reminiscent of Emma, materialized. Her ghostly figure seemed to reach out through the pixels of the screen, mouthing the words, "Help me," before the image abruptly dissolved into darkness, leaving Jake in shock. With the feeling of dread suffocating them, they began to dig deeper into the paranormal events surrounding Emma's disappearance. They stumbled upon a forum filled with desperate accounts of other missing townsfolk and their own eerie messages, each thread hinting at their tragic fates. The unnerving realization struck them: Emma was not alone in her plight. They had unwittingly become part of a larger tapestry of horror woven through time. As the fear festered in their minds, shadows crept into the corners of their lives, ever watchful, intensifying the urgency of their investigation. They had to find a way to unravel this mystery before it consumed them, as Emma's dark fate seemed to loom ever closer, whispering from the shadows that gathered outside their windows. In the dim light of her bedroom, Lucy trembled, the air thick with an oppressive weight that seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. It started as merely an unsettling feeling, a chill crawling up her spine, but soon her body betrayed her. Shivers racked her frame, and her heart raced as shadows danced around her, whispering secrets only she could hear. The whispers crescendoed into a cacophony, and Lucy clutched her head, struggling against the visceral force that wanted to take control. It was then that she realized she wasn't alone. Something dark had begun to seep into her very soul. Meanwhile, Jake was piecing together devastating revelations about their town. In the flickering glow of his laptop, he unearthed a history of horrors linked to the stalker, an entity that emerged every 20 years, claiming lives and spreading misery. As the account of each violent death unfurled before his eyes, a heavy dread settled in his stomach. What if Lucy was destined to become its next victim? With his heart racing, he felt an urgent call to arms and resolved to gather his closest friends, paranormal enthusiasts who might help in confronting this ancient evil. As friends gathered at Jake's house, an air of dread hung over them. Faces were pale and voices hushed, all acutely aware of the cursed narrative tying their lives together. They shared what they knew about Lucy's odd behavior, not yet aware of the sinister force that was trying to claim her. But it was Lucy's increasingly erratic tendencies that left them most unsettled. She slid between moments of lucidity and frightening rages, her eyes often glazed with a shadowy sheen. To the group, it seemed like something inside her fought for dominance, pushing her to darker places. One evening, during a particularly heated discussion, Lucy burst into the room, her demeanor wildly erratic. "You think you can leave me?" she shrieked, her voice filled with a chilling, guttural echo. Jake's heart sank as he saw the darkness swirling in her gaze. In that moment, Lucy was not just his friend. She was a battleground, torn between who she used to be and the malicious force that was claiming her. The shadows twisted around her, and for a fleeting second, the old Lucy shone through as she pleaded with Jake to help her. "I'm fighting it, Jake. Please," she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yet before he could reach her, the transformation intensified. She contorted, her shadow stretching ominously behind, forming a grotesque mimicry of her figure. "You don't know what's coming," the dark reflection hissed, revealing wicked, gleaming teeth that sent chills through the room. Jake stepped back, realizing that they were dealing with something far more powerful and insidious than they had anticipated. Desperation surged through Jake as he called on their friends to form a plan. "We need to act fast. We can't let that thing take her." Determination flickered in their eyes, but as Lucy regained herself momentarily, they all knew time was running out. The entity within her was relentless, eager to escape its confines. They had to gather their strength, confront their fears, and prepare for a final showdown. The bruised love of friends against the crushing dark that sought to consume them. In that darker hour, as shadows crept closer, they stood united, knowing that the fight for Lucy's soul, and for their own lives, was just beginning. The air grew heavy with anticipation as Jake gathered his closest friends, an eclectic mix of paranormal enthusiasts who had heard the whispers of the haunting shadows that plagued their town. With each friend he summoned, the gravity of their mission deepened. They would conduct a ritual in the ominous barn where darkness had taken root, seeking to banish the stalker once and for all. As twilight settled, a sickly pallor painted the sky, foreboding their fateful encounter. The old barn loomed before them, a grotesque silhouette against the fading light, its creaking wooden planks and shattered windows embodying years of sorrow and dread. Armed with candles, salt, and ancient symbols chalked onto tattered sheets of paper, the group stepped inside. The atmosphere thickened as they found themselves surrounded by dust which seemed to dance as if alive, an eerie pulsation echoing the fear gripping their hearts. Unsettling memories flooded their minds, the faces of those who had disappeared, all drawn into the darkness that stalked them. As they began the ritual, the tension was palpable. Jake stood at the head of a makeshift circle, leading the incantation which wove together hope and desperation. The words spilled from his lips, tinged with urgency, as the candlelight flickered ominously around them. The barn seemed to respond, almost shuddering, as if awakening from a long slumber. Shadows began to stretch and contort, creeping menacingly along the barn's walls, as though eager to break free. Then, without warning, the ground trembled beneath them, and an unholy wind whipped through the barn, extinguishing their candles and plunging them into darkness. Panicked screams erupted as the very air seemed to throb with anguish. From the shadows, anguished faces emerged, twisting and writhing in torment, mere reflections of the souls lost to the stalker. They reached out, their mouths silently pleading, reminding Jake and his friends of the horrible reality they faced, not just an entity, but a mass of tortured souls. Fear escalated as a dark form materialized, coalescing into the shape of the stalker, an entity embodying despair itself. Eyes like hollow voids bore into Jake, filling him with an overwhelming sense of dread. The shadows writhed in protest, and Jake's heart raced, the knowledge that they had awakened something far older, far more malicious than they could have imagined. As it howled in rage, a cacophony of lost voices echoed around them, drowning out their cries, urging them to flee, yet they stood their ground. Together, they recited the incantation louder, their voices blending in harmony. The power of their unity held the shadows at bay, but it was evident that the darkness would not be easily vanquished. If they were to succeed, they had to confront the very essence of fear that festered in the barn. As Jake felt the oppressive weight of despair pressing down, he held on to the conviction that love and connection could breach the veil of shadows surrounding them. But just as clarity struck, the ground beneath them heaved violently, threatening to tear their circle apart. The true battle for their souls had just begun. The air crackled with tension as Jake gathered the small group of friends in the dim light of the old barn, their faces illuminated by flickering candles that cast long shadows against the crumbling walls. Each of them felt the weight of their shared fear, the dark history of their town looming large in their minds. The realization that to vanquish the malicious stalker, a sacrifice was needed hung heavily in the air, like a dark cloud ready to burst. Discussions erupted, voices rising and falling in frantic debate as they debated the unthinkable choice before them. Who among them would step into the abyss to end the terror? Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled violently, pulling their attention back to Lucy, who stood just beyond the candlelit circle, her eyes blank and vacant. A chill swept through the group as they realized the entity had started to take her. With a tormented howl, Lucy's body convulsed violently, losing the spark of who she once was. "No, stay with us, Lucy," Jake shouted, rushing towards her, his heart racing as fear clutched his throat. But the entity was relentless. It began to use her as a puppet, forcing her to lash out at her friends with a terrifying strength they could hardly comprehend. "Leave her alone," Jake cried out, desperation turning to rage. The room felt colder, shadows creeping closer as he grappled with his feelings of helplessness. Just then, in a fleeting moment of clarity, Lucy's eyes locked onto Jake's, and for a heartbeat, he saw her struggle beneath the surface. "Jake, please, help me," she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper, a solitary plea amidst the chaos. In that moment, the world around him faded, and Jake's heart shattered at the sight of her anguish. Every memory they shared, every laugh, every moment of love filled him with an urgency that nearly swept him away. But as the shadows thickened, the sinister force wrapped around Lucy, pulling her deeper into darkness. With a blood-curdling scream, she turned on her friends, a cruel smile twisting her lips as she lashed out with unnatural rage. The realization dawned on Jake that time was running out. They had to act. As they huddled together, fear mingled with determination. They fought to regain control, to remind Lucy of who she truly was, to break the hold of the entity that threatened to consume her entirely. As chaos erupted around them, the energy in the room swelled, bursting with raw emotion. Among the fearful shouts and the oppressive shadows swirling, Jake took a deep breath and stepped forward, channeling every ounce of love he had for Lucy into their ongoing ritual. In an overwhelming surge, he called her name, trying to penetrate the wall of darkness that surrounded her. The shadows began to shrink and quiver as bright light fought against their grasp, a battle of wills fought in the heart of the barn. It was then, just as they reached the precipice of triumph, that Lucy's form began to glow. "Jake, she gasped, fear and love intertwining in her eyes as she struggled against the darkness. And in that moment of clarity, she made a choice, one that would forever entwine their fates. Just as the shadows threatened to consume her entirely, Lucy broke through to the surface, tears streaming down her face. "You have to save everyone," she whispered, a mixture of sorrow and resolve filling the air between them. "I can't hold it back much longer." With her last breath of strength, Lucy made the ultimate sacrifice. The air around them erupted in a flash of light, but the darkness only hissed and clawed, desperate to reclaim what it had lost. The downward spiral of shadows swallowed Lucy whole as she cried out one final time, the echoes of her love lingering in the air. Jake, paralyzed with grief and horror, watched as the darkness began to dissipate, the entity faltering as Lucy's sacrifice held it at bay, momentarily weakening its grip on the world. The atmosphere pulsed with energy, hope mingling with despair, as Jake realized the battle was far from over. With Lucy's essence now entwined with his resolve, Jake steeled himself for the showdown that awaited them. He would have to harness her love and memory to combat the malevolence that sought to claim him as well. The shadows retreated, but their watchful eyes remained, looming just beyond the veil of reality, silently promising that the fight would continue, with Lucy's spirit forever guiding him against the darkness. In the heart of the decrepit barn, the air thick with an oppressive dread, Jake stood resolute, his heart pounding and his breath shallow. The shadows, swirling like living smoke, beckoned to him with a sinister whisper, a cacophony of tortured voices echoing in his ears. At the center of this darkness stood Lucy, her eyes wild, reflecting the turmoil of the internal battle that raged within her. She was there yet not there. An entity of despair had tightened its grip on her, bending her will to its own. "Lucy!" Jake cried, desperation lacing his voice as he reached out toward her. "Fight it! You're stronger than this." But her features twisted, a cruel grin formed on her lips, mirroring the essence of the darkness enveloping her. For a moment, he saw Lucy, her true self shining through, but it flickered like a candle caught in a storm. As the shadows writhed and the barn creaked ominously, Jake took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of love he had for her. He remembered the way they laughed together, their dreams intertwining under starlit skies, the warmth of their bond illuminating the darkest corners of their hearts. "I won't let you go," he whispered, anchoring his spirit to the memories they had created. With trembling hands, he began to recite the ritual they had prepared, infusing each word with the essence of their love, the only force he believed could bind the malevolence that threatened to consume them both. The shadows recoiled, howling in rage as Jake's voice resonated with unwavering determination. "We are more than this darkness. Lucy, remember us." The wind picked up, rattling the barn's walls, as if the very universe acknowledged his plea. But in that moment of hope, Lucy's body convulsed, and the dark force within her unleashed a terrifying scream, an anguished wail that echoed through the barn, shaking the ground beneath them. "Jake!" Lucy's voice emerged, broken yet fierce, filled with sorrow and love intertwined. "You have to save yourself." For an agonizing moment, the struggle tore at her, like a vessel caught in a tempest. Her eyes locked onto his, a glimmer of clarity surfacing just as the shadows swarmed around her, ready to pull her back into their grasp. "Stay with me," Jake pleaded, stepping closer despite the danger, his heart shattering at the sight of her pain. "We can do this together." But the shadows were relentless. They surged forward, tendrils of darkness reaching toward him, urging him to turn away. It was then Lucy's spirit broke free for that fleeting second, the true essence within her shining brighter than the encroaching dark. "I love you, Jake," she cried, her voice filled with urgency and despair, a harsh contrast to the darkness that surrounded them. Just as the shadows began to envelop her once more, Lucy, in an act of love and bravery, made the ultimate sacrifice. She let go. A blinding light erupted around her as she channeled all her strength into the very heart of the darkness, forcing it to flinch. The shadows writhed in agony, howling as they were drawn towards her, merging with the light instead of allowing it to escape. "Lucy!" Jake screamed, the realization crashing down upon him as she became one with the shadows, sealing herself within the entity that had tormented them. In that moment, the barn erupted with a quiet power, an energy birthed from love and sacrifice that even the darkest evil could not extinguish. The walls trembled, the crimson dusk swirling into swirling tides of luminous hues. With the last fragments of her spirit, Lucy vowed to protect Jake, even from beyond. The shadows, now contained, howled in defeat as the light surged upward, shattering the oppressive air that weighed heavily on their souls. And as silence descended upon the barn, an ethereal calm settled in, radiant and pure, leaving only a hollow ache in Jake's chest. In the aftermath, the barn stood still, renewed yet forever marked by the battle fought within its walls. Jake sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face, calling out her name, knowing she was gone, but that her love lingered as a powerful force coursing through him. The town remained haunted, the cycle of shadows perhaps not broken but stifled for the time being, upheld by the memory of a love that defied even the darkest of horrors. With the sun rising over the cornfield, an eerie peace was returned, but a whisper of shadows lingered, hinting that Lucy's essence was still there, guarding him from the dark that would always haunt. As Jake left the barn, he glanced over his shoulder one last time, his heart echoing with the sentiment of her final words, and he carried her love as a shield. For now, they had triumphed, but he had a promise to keep, to live, to remember, and to ensure the darkness did not claim another soul unwarned. The specter of the past would forever haunt, intertwining their fates, yet Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose glowing bright within him, a testament to their unbreakable bond, even in the face of shadows.